Ma'am, shall we start, ma'am? It's on live, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, yeah, ma'am. So, very good evening, doctors. I'm Dr. Stalin on behalf of Shield Healthcare, welcoming you all for today's webinar. So, the topic for today's webinar is optimization of poor ovarian reserve. I welcome all the participants and I request them to share their queries in the comment box so that we can have a short QA session at the end of this presentation. So now we have our invited speaker for the day, Dr. Vigneta Nutalapati ma'am. Madam is currently the clinical director at Vigneta Fertility and IVF Center, Guntur. Madam has completed her MBBS and MS from NTR University. Madam has her fellowship in reproductive medicine from Milan, Bangalore. Madam has been awarded prizes for posters and papers in national international conferences. Madam has uh, given more posters, and Madam has also authored a book on drug therapy in pregnancy in obstetric emergency. So with this short introduction, I welcome you, ma'am, and I'm handing the session to you, ma'am, for further proceedings.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Vigneta. Now today I will be discussing about optimization of poor ovarian reserve. Now let me please share the screen. As we all know, for a fertility consultant, any female who's presenting with infertility and is diagnosed to have poor ovarian reserve or is already a known case of poor ovarian responder is a very tough nut to crack. So today I will be discussing about the adjuvants we can use in these patients to improve the response to ovarian stimulation. These are the headings under which I'm covering this topic. So what is poor ovarian reserve? So is there any definition for it? Till date, with various studies and various articles published by ESHRE, but there is no single accepted definition for poor ovarian reserve. It refers to three different parameters, that is the oocyte quality, quantity, and also the reproductive potential. We all know that we have various tests to assess the ovarian reserve like AMH, FSH, day 2 estradiol levels, inhibin B levels. But any of these tests we do for this assessment does not give us the indicator of pregnancy rate, but only gives us a probable response of a patient to IVF cycle or an IUI cycle. Now, here, we all know that in today's era, when compared to the 80s and 90s, there is a delay in childbearing due to various reasons like career, late marriages, and all of that. This leads to increasing number of couples that are requiring artificial reproductive techniques or assisted reproductive techniques. One is due to aging and the other is due to the poor ovarian reserve. So these are the various tests by which we can assess the ovarian reserve. One is the chronological age and the biochemical tests like FSH, inhibin B, estradiol, and AMH. In the dynamic test, these are not being used now. Ultrasound, we can assess the antral follicle count, ovarian volume, and the blood flow. And the ovarian biopsy, this is not being done now. Among these, the most effective are the anti-mullerian hormone and the antral follicle count, FSH, and the E2 levels. So ACOG has given the cutoff values for FSH as more than 10 to 20 and E2 levels of more than 60 to 80 to be predicted as a poor ovarian responder, and with AMH of 0.2 to 0.7 nanogram per ml and AFC of 3 to 10 follicles. These parameters give us the cutoff values for a poor ovarian responder. Whereas ISA, that is Indian Society of Assisted Reproduction, has given the cutoff values of AMH to be 0.7 to 1.3 nanogram per ml and antral follicle count of less than 7 follicles. So what will this poor ovarian reserve lead to? So with diagnosis of poor ovarian reserve, there is a decreased response to the gonadotropins and also the number and the quality of oocytes is decreased, and thereby there is a decrease in the clinical pregnancy rate and the live birth rate. And definitely because of the increase in age, there is an increase in the miscarriage rate also. So what is poor ovarian response? Though there are various definitions given over the years, but none is considered as a conclusive single definition. So they have said that development of insufficient number of follicles following a maximal gonadotropin stimulation, which is finally leading either to cycle cancellation or retrieval of a less number of oocytes. And in few other definitions, they have mentioned that a decreased follicular response with low estradiol levels following stimulation, leading to less number of oocytes and less transferable embryos. So this is the problem statement, as we call. This incidence of poor ovarian reserve is around 9 to 24% in the last 10 years. And there was a study published in 2015 where a worldwide survey was done in all the IVF clinics, and they are asked to estimate the proportion of poor responders in their clinic. And among the respondents, 41% have said that the poor ovarian reserve constitute about 6 to 10% of their overall IVF cycles. And around 56% of the clinics have said that poor ovarian reserve are more than 10% of their cycles. And about 15% have said that it is more than 20%. So almost around 61% of the IVF clinics said that there is a definite increase in the incidence of poor ovarian reserve in the last 10 years. So definitely this group of patients are one of the most challenging patients for any fertility specialist to treat. So in 2011, there was an article published in Fertility Sterility where they have done multiple studies, and they have published based on the several RCTs, that is around 47 RCTs, and they try to put up a definition for poor responder. So these definitions they have given based on their age, antral follicle count, FSH levels, response to the previous cycle, dose of gonadotropins and the duration of stimulation, and the peak E2 levels and all these. But then after publishing the study, the pitfalls of this is that in many of the studies, the sample size was too small. And though multiple definitions were given based on these, but not more than 3 trials included the same definition. And also the cause and the mechanism of how this poor ovarian responder occurs is not very clear. So then in 2011, ESHRE published a consensus called Bologna consensus, where they have tried to put up a definition for poor ovarian responder. So in this, among the 3 of the following, at least 2 should meet the criteria for any patient to be mentioned as a poor ovarian responder. So they should have an advanced maternal age that is more than or equal to 40 years or any other risk factors. A previous poor ovarian responder, that is who have less than or equal to 3 oocytes with maximum gonadotropin stimulation. And on abnormal ovarian reserve test, that is AFC of less than 5 to 7 or AMH of less than 1.1 nanogram per ml. And also, if there are 2 episodes of poor ovarian responder after maximal stimulation, even that is also sufficient for the diagnosis, irrespective of the age. And at any patient with advanced maternal age and reduced ovarian reserve is defined to be an expected poor responder. So till the formation of these Bologna criteria, all the definitions given were not conclusive, and they were very inadequate and inconsistent. But still, there is a clinical dilemma about this Bologna consensus also. So because it included heterogeneous subgroups of patients, and the age and the oocyte number related aneuploidy is not actually considered in this criteria. Again, in 2015, Fertility Sterility has published an article giving a new definition for poor responder. So this was a very detailed classification so that this can be used to improve the treatment outcome and also guide the physicians better. They have given a criteria called Poseidon criteria. So in this, apart from the number of oocytes retrieved, they also considered the age-related aneuploidy rate and also the sensitivity to gonadotropins. So this Poseidon criteria, it is patient-oriented strategies encompassing individualized oocyte number. So this criteria was published taking into consideration the categorization of patients is based on the response to the stimulation and also included both qualitative and quantitative response, and sensitivity to gonadotropins is also taken into account. And they also considered the ability to generate optimal number of oocytes based on the age to produce at least one euploid embryo. And also in implementing the protocol, that is the stimulation protocol in case of a impaired response is also considered. So these are the various groups given in these Poseidon criteria. So in first group and the group 2, these are the patients who have a normal ovarian reserve parameters, but they have an unexpected poor or either a suboptimal response. And in group 3 and group 4, they are patients who have a poor ovarian reserve parameters. So when we compare this to the Bologna criteria, this Poseidon have introduced 2 new categories of response. That is a suboptimal response, where they is defined as retrieval of 4 to 9 oocytes at any given age, be it more than 35 or less than 35 years, with a lower live birth rate when compared to the normal responders, and a hypo response, which is actually to obtain an adequate number of oocytes, that is more than 3 oocytes, a higher dose of gonadotropins and more prolonged stimulation is required. And it also considered the age of the patient, the expected aneuploidy rate, and also the AMH and the AFC. So the advantage is with these Poseidon criteria when compared to Bologna criteria is we can decide the protocol, and any genetic polymorphisms can also be identified. And this is also useful in deciding the dosage of the gonadotropins. So why does this poor ovarian response occur? This is because a reduced number of follicles have the FSH sensitivity, and sometimes the dosage may not be adequate. So the gonadotropins given are not sufficient for the follicle growth. And also in some cases, there are some polymorphisms which occur in the FHS and the LH receptor subtypes. So the follicles are less sensitive to these gonadotropins. So what is the cause or what are the risk factors for the poor ovarian responder? One is definitely the elderly group of women, and women with high FSH levels, low AMH and low antral follicle count, or small ovaries, we consider it to be less than 3 centimeter cube. And history of a poor ovarian response, in history of ovarian surgery, maybe for endometriosis, or in some cases, laparoscopic drilling for polycystic ovaries may also lead to the less number of follicles, which finally lead to the less response to the stimulation. And sometimes genetic defects also come into play. And history of any chemo or radiotherapy, chronic smokers. And in the past few years, this polymorphism of FSH and LH receptors are being diagnosed more in patients who have a poor ovarian response. And the new risk factors are type 1 diabetes, history of uterine artery embolization for fibroids, or post-salpingectomy for ectopic pregnancy. So actually, I will not be discussing about the protocols we use in the poor responders because it's one totally different lecture. So I will be just talking about the adjuvants we can use to increase the response in this group of patients. So what are these adjuvants actually? These are the drugs which increase the effectiveness of the another pharmacological agent. So any woman with a poor ovarian response is expected to have the similar response in the next cycle. So such women, we try to use the adjuvants so that the sensitivity of the follicles to the gonadotropins is improved. So these are the various adjuvants we can use in these poor ovarian responders. I will be discussing about each one in detail. Androgens. These are called the double-edged sword. Like the word said, see, when these androgens are in the normal levels, that is, they help in the preantral follicle growth and also in the recruitment of the preantral follicles to the antral follicle stage and prevent the follicular atresia. Whereas when these androgens are present in higher levels, so they lead to follicle atresia, follicle arrest and degeneration, and also they play a role in the developmental competence of the oocyte. So these androgen receptors are actually seen in the oocytes, granulosa cells, theca cells, and also they regulate the growth and development of the follicle. So when we see the intensity of these androgen receptors in the different stages of the follicle, more number of androgen receptors are seen in the preantral or the antral stage. Okay, so that the sensitivity to the gonadotropins is increased and more number of the antral follicle, the preantral follicles are being recruited for stimulation. So the androgen supplementation will help in increasing the intraovarian concentration of androgens. These act through the androgen receptors, which are more predominantly seen on the granulosa cells. And they also help in the upregulation of insulin growth factor 1 levels and their receptors. And thus they help in the follicle recruitment, growth, and survival. So what are the different androgens we have? DHEA. So this is synthesized from the cholesterol, and it is a precursor for both testosterone and also estradiol. The concentrations, the circulating level concentrations are between 1 to 10 nanogram per ml. So this DHEA is converted to androstenedione and to testosterone and exerts the androgenic effect. And from these, it gets converted to estrone and estradiol by the aromatase enzyme. This DHEA is actually produced in the adrenal zona reticularis and also the ovarian stromal cells, and a little amount is formed from the conversion of DHEAS. So how does this help in poor ovarian reserve cases? So DHEA supplementation increases the level of androgen, which thus improves the FHS receptors and helps in preventing the atresia of the follicles and also improves the IGF-1 levels. Thus, the response to the gonadotropins is increased and more number of oocytes are retrieved, and also the quality of the oocytes is improved. So in which group of patients does this DHEA help? It is useful in patients with premature ovarian aging, poor quality of the oocytes, and also known poor ovarian responders. And when we check into the side effects, these drug is actually safe, and only some patient population will complain of breast tenderness, mild hirsutism or acne, and deepening of voice. So how does this DHEA act? DHEA acts mainly in the early follicle growth stage, even before the gonadotropin sensitive phase, and helps in recruitment of more number of follicles. And it also acts as a precursor for the steroids. That is, it also helps in more number of androgen and estrogen production. So dosage is around 75 milligram per day. It can be given either as 25 mg 3 times a day capsule or 75 mg oral form, and for at least 6 to 8 weeks before the stimulation. So this was a study published in 2018 where they studied the DHEA supplementation improves IVF outcome in poor ovarian responders, mainly in women with low levels of DHEAs. So in this, around 176 cycles with ANTAC protocol was done in known POR patients, and they were given 90 mg per day for 3 months. And they said that in the DHEA group, there were higher number of retrieved oocytes and metaphase 2 oocytes, and the fertilized oocytes were higher, and with a high clinical pregnancy, ongoing pregnancy rate, and live birth rate when compared to the control group. So this was another study, that's a meta-analysis published in 2019 recently, the effect of DHEA on IVF or ICSI. In this, around 9 RCTs with 833 patients were included, and the DHEA group were given 75 mg daily for 12 weeks. And they showed the result that with DHEA, there are a higher number of retrieved oocytes. In the clinical pregnancy and the live birth rate is also definitely improved. And this was another meta-analysis published in 2016. This also stated that there's an overall significant improvement in the clinical pregnancy rate with DHEA. And coming to the other androgen available, that is testosterone. This is carried in the peripheral blood by binding to the sex hormone binding globulin. And the absorption of testosterone through the skin is around 9 to 12% of the applied dose, and it diffuses into the systemic circulation. How does this testosterone act? It improves the FSH sensitivity of the follicles and also improves the follicle function and the steroidogenesis. The dosage is around 12.5 milligrams per day or 20 micrograms per kg per day from day 15 of the previous cycle to day 2 of the stimulation cycle. In some studies, they say that from day 6 of the preceding cycle to day 2 of the stimulation cycle. And it should be applied topically, either on the upper arms or the abdomen area. And it should be uncovered. That area should be not covered for 10 to 15 minutes to improve the absorption. But there are few side effects with these testosterone gel. That is, they may complain of acne, hirsutism, that is also mild, deepening of voice, and sometimes very rarely skin irritation. So this was a study published in 2010 in Fertility Sterility, where the effect of transdermal testosterone gel pre-treatment was studied. And this was a very small sample size. That is only 110 cases were included. And they were given 12.5 mg of testosterone gel daily for 21 days. And they showed with testosterone gel pre-treatment, the dose of gonadotropins and the duration of stimulation was less, with high number of oocytes, high number of good quality embryos, and higher clinical pregnancy rate. This was also a meta-analysis which included 7 RCTs, and it was conducted in women with poor ovarian response in previous cycles. And they used testosterone in different formulations, that is either gel or patch or oral capsules. And they said that definitely there is an increase in the number of oocytes retrieved and higher live birth rate. This was a famous pre-transport trial in 2017, which is a multi-center randomized control trial, where 400 women with poor ovarian response according to Bologna criteria were included. And gel was given for 2 months prior to stimulation, and long agonist protocol was done in all these patients. So this was the protocol, the protocol used in the T-transport trial. So in this group with the testosterone gel, more number of android follicles with more number of FSH receptors are seen. Thus, the oocyte yield is also increased, and the reproductive outcome is also better in women with poor ovarian reserve. So this is how they used it. 20 days pre-stimulation, we can start it from day 6 of the preceding cycle to day 2 of the stimulation cycle. Then Cochrane have released in 2011 regarding the usage of these androgens for women undergoing ART. It included around 17 RCTs with a total of 1,496 participants. And in these trials, they either used testosterone or DHEA with placebo. And DHEA was given around 2 to 6 weeks before stimulation till the end of stimulation. And testosterone was given around 21 days pre-stimulation. The primary outcome they studied was live birth rate and the miscarriage rate. And the secondary outcome was a clinical pregnancy rate with adverse effects. So Cochrane stated that with testosterone and DHEA use is associated with increased live birth rate. And it also stated that with DHEA use, the chances of live birth improved from 12% to around 26%. And with testosterone usage, the chance of live birth improved from 8% to 32%, stating that the usage of these androgens is pretty useful in patients who are undergoing IVF. But anyways, whatever said and done, the overall quality of the evidence is still moderate, and there is no conclusion that either of the androgen is completely safe. Next, coming to the next adjuvant available, that is the growth hormone. So this growth hormone mainly acts by improving the insulin growth factor 1 levels, and thus the sensitivity of the follicles to the gonadotropins is improved. So this growth hormone usage help in patients with poor ovarian response. So it also helps in improving the nuclear and the cytoplasmic maturation, and thus the DNA repair is also stimulated. And it increases the IGF-1 levels, as I already said, and thus the aromatization also improves and conversion of these androgens to estrogen also occurs, and thus helps in cytoplasmic maturation. It also has an effect on the quality of the oocyte. So there was one meta-analysis published in 2009 stating that addition of growth hormone increases the probability of live birth in poor ovarian responders. So the dosage is around 8 to 12 intranasal units from day 6 of the cycle till the day of trigger, or it can be started from day 1 of stimulation along with gonadotropins. So in Cochrane published in 2010 regarding the growth hormone usage in poor ovarian responders, it stated that there is an increased pregnancy and live birth rate, but it was not able to mention which subgroup of responders will benefit with this, because all the trials included were very few and also sample size was very small. But definitely the use of growth hormone increases the cost of the IVF cycle. So most of the clinicians don't prefer using this unless and until required. So this was one more meta-analysis published in 2015, where the efficacy of growth hormone supplementation along with gonadotropins in IVF for poor ovarian responders was studied. They showed that there's a significant increase in the estradiol levels, M2 oocytes, and the good quality embryos, but there is no significant difference in the implantation rate and the clinical pregnancy rate. This was another study published in 2016, where the patients were divided into two groups. One group were given HMG along with growth hormone from day 6, and other group were given just HMG with an ARTAC protocol. They studied that there is improvement or significant difference in the number of oocytes collected, M2 oocytes, and the transferable embryos, but there is no significant difference in the clinical pregnancy or the ongoing pregnancy rate. Next, coming to the other adjuvant, pyridostigmine. This is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. It inhibits the somatostatin release and thus improves the growth hormone secretion. The dosage is around 60 mg twice a day. Regarding this use, there was an article published in 1999 where they included 70 patients, and they stated that addition of pyridostigmine does not improve the ongoing pregnancy or the clinical pregnancy rate in patients with poor ovarian response. Next comes estradiol. Estradiol priming in the luteal phase from day 21 of the previous cycle till the stimulation cycle. Second day can be done, which helps in follicle synchronization. The dosage is around 4 milligrams per day. And ANTAG also can be used along with estradiol for the synchronization of follicles. Next comes the L-arginine. So this is mainly involved in the formation of nitric oxide, which plays a role in follicle maturation and also in the ovulation, and also helps in increasing the vascularization because it's a vasodilator. So addition of L-arginine in poor ovarian responders help in improving the number of oocytes retrieved, but currently there is no beneficial effect on the pregnancy outcome. Coming to the glucocorticoids, as is steroids, they help in improving the efficacy of the gonadotropins on the follicles, and thus even the endometrial microenvironment can be improved. But the dosage and the drug used are not usually regularly followed by all the clinicians. Dexamethasone 1 mg per day can be given till the pickup. Coming to the leucine, this is an essential amino acid which helps in the activation of the mammalian target rapamycin. So with 90 days pre-treatment with this mTOR, that is which contains around 800 milligrams of leucine, in patients with poor ovarian response, it helps in improving the AMH levels and the antral follicle count and also the number of oocytes and embryos. It was stated in ESHRE 2019. So the other antioxidants useful for this poor ovarian responders are vitamin C of 80 milligram, vitamin D 1000 IU daily, N-acetylcysteine, CoQ10, proanthocyanidin, curcumin, and quercetin. These are actually available in the diet we take. That is, the curcumin is from the turmeric extracts, the proanthocyanidin is from the grapes and the nuts, and quercetin is from the leafy vegetables. So ideally, if we improve the diet, what we take, there may be a better chance in improving the quality of the oocyte. Next comes the CoQ10, which is the most talked about adjuvant. So it is a part of the electron transport chain, The naturally occurring compound ubiquinone and its reduced form is called as ubiquinol. It mainly helps in improving the mitochondrial activity. Excuse me. The dosage is around 600 BD for 12 weeks according to SRM. A maximum of 1200 milligrams per day can be given. But the beneficial role has not yet been studied about this. Next comes melatonin. So this is secreted by the pineal gland in the midnight, that is from 2 to 5 a.m., which mainly regulates the reproductive behavior. So it's a free radical scavenger. It mainly helps in preventing the oocyte aging and also helps in follicle maturation. The dosage is around 3 milligram per day. So there was this article published in 2017 regarding the use of melatonin on the outcome of ART cycles in women with poor ovarian reserve. It's a double-blind RCT where just a small number of patients were included, and first group were given 3 milligram per day from day 1 of previous cycle till the day of pickup. The second group were given just a placebo. So they showed that with the use of melatonin, the peak E2 levels and the M2 oocytes were higher. The grade 1 embryos were also quite higher. But there was no statistically significant difference in the clinical pregnancy or the live birth rate. Next comes resveratrol. This is called the new kid on the block. This is being used nowadays among the fertility clinics because it has a multiple useful actions. That is, it is anti-inflammatory, anti-aging, antioxidant. It's anti-neoplastic, insulin sensitizer, and also a cardioprotective vasodilator. So this is the mechanism of action, how this resveratrol works. It has effects on both the ovary and the endometrium. But quite interesting thing was it has a favorable effect on the ovary, but on the endometrium, it shows some inhibitory effect. So on the ovary, it acts through Sitouin-1 and it reduces the oxidative stress and thereby improves the telomeric lengthening, and it acts as a mitochondrial energizer and thus improves the quality of the oocyte. Whereas in the endometrium, it undergoes epigenetic changes like acetylation and it prevents the endometrial residualization. Therefore, it decreases the receptivity and thus implantation rate is reduced. With these actions, there was a study published in 2019 regarding the use of this resveratrol preconceptionally. Is it a friend or a foe? So in first group of patients, 200 milligrams of resveratrol was given for 2 cycles, and second group they just have given placebo, and they showed that the clinical pregnancy and the implantation rate was decreased in the first group, and the miscarriage rate is also quite high. So here comes the question whether we should give this drug as an adjuvant or not. So the ideal thing would be we can give it in the pre-stimulation phase and we can stop it in the luteal phase. That is just till the day of pickup, we can give it and then stop, or it's better to go for a frozen embryo transfer. Next, coming to the upcoming advances in these poor ovarian responders. Assisted hatching. So this laser assisted hatching is not likely to increase the clinical pregnancy rate when it is performed in fresh embryos or in women who are of advanced maternal age. So this is not likely to improve the clinical pregnancy rate. And also Cochrane has stated in 2009 that there is no significant difference in the live birth rate with laser assisted hatching. Co-phase, that is co-transfer of fresh and collected cryopreserved embryos. This is one cost-effective option available for poor responders before we take them into our oocyte donation. Next, coming to ovarian fragmentation and in vitro activation. So in poor ovarian responders or already known case of premature ovarian insufficiency, here the process is we remove the ovaries and we make them into ovarian strips for vitrification and then cryopreserve them. After the hyposignaling is disrupted, they were made into small cubes, and these cubes are again put back beneath the serosa of the fallopian tubes. And then we do the stimulation and we retrieve the eggs and then do IVF with the husband's sperms. And the embryos thus formed are transferred into the woman's uterus. So there was a study published in 2015 regarding this ovarian fragmentation and in vitro activation. 27 patients with ovarian failure were included. Among these 27, 13 patients have residual follicles while doing the histological examination. And among these 13, 8 had successful growth after the fragmentation. And among these 8, 5 had mature oocytes after stimulation. And among these 5, 2 had successful pregnancy following frozen embryo transfer, and 1 patient delivered a healthy baby. Next comes the ovarian PRP. PRP is a platelet-rich plasma protein which is derived from the whole blood by centrifugation and by removing the RBCs. It is definitely rich in the growth factors which helps in tissue regeneration. So the ovarian cortex stimulates the germ cell line to develop more number of oocytes, and the ovarian function is returned back to normal within 3 months in around 8 menopausal women, but still large data is required to confirm the use of PRP in all the patients. So this is how we prepare the PRP. There are multiple techniques, but the autologous PRP protocol is the one which we can prepare in our own clinic. So in this, around with 2 ml of anticoagulant in a tube, are collect around 18 ml of blood from the patient and do a centrifugation for 10 minutes at 2200 RPM. And then the Buffy coat is collected. And then again, the centrifugation is done for 10 minutes. The supernatant is removed and diluted with plasma. So we use a double centrifugation technique commonly for the PRP. Whereas in a cosmetic purpose and all, they do the single centrifugation technique. For ovarian PRP, we need to inject 2 ml for each ovary, either through transvaginal method or through the laparoscopic method. For endometrial, usually 0.6 ml to 0.9 ml can be given. For subendometrial, around 3 ml is given. So there was this study published recently in 2020 regarding the use of autologous PRP in different subgroups of patients, like in premature ovarian insufficiency, perimenopausal group, menopausal group, and the poor responders. So for poor response women, they showed that with PRP, there is a significant improvement in FSH, LH, and AMH levels, and the dose of gonadotropins is reduced, and the stimulation days were lesser with the use of PRP. Next comes the stem cell therapy, which is a new agent, or which is a new hope for this people who are already known poor responder or with premature ovarian insufficiency, not opting for oocyte donation. Then comes the mitochondrial activation. This is mainly useful in women with multiple failed IVF and who have already a known mitochondrial disease. So this was the article which is published regarding the birth of a baby with 3-parent DNA. So this is how the mitochondrial activation is done. There are 2 different techniques. One is the maternal spindle transfer and the other is pronuclear transfer. Mother's egg with the faulty DNA is first fertilized with the sperm in the lab, and then the faulty DNA is remained like that, and the genes of the parents are removed, and then they are transferred into a donor egg by removing the donor's genes, and then this is implanted into the uterus. So I will be telling the conclusion with all the discussion we have done. So regarding the protocols useful for poor ovarian responders, it mainly depends on the age, AMH, BMI, and the previous response the woman has over the IVF cycles. And any ideal protocol should be mimicking the physiological conditions and with lowest visits to the clinic and better response to the patient. And analogs are equally effective, but untagged protocol is more preferred. Supplementation with LH is recommended mainly in hyporesponders. Adjuvants like growth hormone, androgens can be given, but they are not effective in terms of pregnancy rates. They are only useful in terms of number of oocytes retrieved. And alternative strategies like cryopreservation in cases of patients with cancer can be done. And accumulation of oocytes and embryos is a new way which is being used. And the new modalities, what I have already discussed, like CoQ, mTOR, in vitro activation, use of PRP, stem cell therapy, and mitochondrial donation are under trial, and they can even help us quite a way in improving the poor ovarian responders. Thank you. Thank you, Shield Connect, for giving me this opportunity of discussing this topic, which is very useful for all the clinicians also.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Poor ovarian response is an important limiting factor for the success of any treatment modality in infertility, ma'am. So early detection and active management are essential to minimize the need for egg donation also in women, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, let me wait for 1 or 2 minutes for the participants to post their queries. And if there is any
Okay.
queries, I'll read it for you, ma'am.
Sure, definitely, definitely.
Ma'am, when we are discussing about these adjuvants, what will be your idea or insight on the role of myo-inositols in poor ovarian responders, ma'am? Nowadays, there are many papers which have been published in this myo-inositols, ma'am.
Yeah. Actually, recently regarding the use of myo-inositol in poor responders has been taken up, because previously in polycystic ovaries regularity has been given, but recently they have been giving that myo-inositol also helps in improving the response to the gonadotropins. Those are under trial. Routinely, they are not, as of now, they are not included in any of the drugs actually. But maybe in next few years that will also be coming into place.
Okay, ma'am.
And there is one question regarding the how long to wait after PRP.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, with PRP installation into the ovaries, we can see a response quite a bit within 3 months. So we need to assess between 3 to 6 months, if depending on the number of follicles, then we can start the stimulation again. Usually 3 months.
When it comes to DHEA, there are some studies which shows that more amount of DHEA is not good for this ovarian stimulation, ma'am. What will be your
More amount, that is it should not be given like for a long term treatment. The maximum is around 6 to 8 weeks, not more than that, because as I already said, androgens are like at the normal levels, they help in follicle growth and stimulation, whereas in higher levels they cause follicle atresia. So it's maximum to give between 6 to 8 weeks pre-stimulation, not more than that.
ma'am, whether this leucine supplementation can overcome this aneuploidy in these poor ovarian response cases, ma'am?
Yeah, there are a few studies stating that leucine can help, but definitely it has not been published in any of the articles. They didn't study because in all these cases they have not been doing any pre-implantation genetic testing to rule out aneuploidy. But still, it is showing that definitely the leucine helps in improving the number of oocytes retrieved, and also the better embryos are being transferred in patients who are given leucine. That is also not like for a long time. It is also around for 3 months, not more than that. Leucine also.
Ma'am, what about that polycosenols, ma'am? Some
Sorry, I didn't get you.
polycosenol, ma'am. Polycosenol.
Sorry.
That polycosenol, ma'am.
Okay, polycosenol.
Yes,
Okay, even that also. See, the problem with the adjuvants what have been used is few people, I mean, few clinicians have mentioned that there would be some difference with the number of oocytes and the number of embryos, but definite improvement in the clinical pregnancy rate or the live birth rate is not being mentioned anywhere. So depending on that, we have the usage of the adjuvant should be decided, because in few patients where we do pooling, that is multiple stimulations were done and the embryos are pooled and then they are transferred, they can use these adjuvants. Whereas in patients who are not preferring for pooling, they may not work very well.
fine, ma'am. Since the topic is more about adjuvants, there is no questions, I guess, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. So fine, ma'am. If the so if you allow us, then we can end the webinar for today, ma'am. And if there is any queries, then I will be forwarding through the mail, ma'am.
Sure, no problem. I'll be answering you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your time and for the presentation, ma'am. I would also like to thank our team for making this webinar possible, ma'am. Thank you for
Thank you.
audience for your active participation. Thank you, and all. Thank you, ma'am.